Fantastic. So this is a new series of talks running over the next couple of months on the theme of simplicity as a spiritual practice. So firstly, is anybody a fan, or have you ever seen a program called Sort Your Life Out? Surely there's somebody. Yes, Johnny. Yes, Catherine. Yes, I can see a few nodding heads. So basically, the idea of Sort Your Life Out is that Stacey Solomon and a team of experts spend 7 days helping a family who have pretty much lost control of what they own and what's in their home. So first, they spend the first day boxing up literally everything in the house. Then it is categorized by an unspecified number of people. You imagine there's a whole army of people. Categorized and laid out beautifully in this ginormous ginormous warehouse before the family comes, and they spend 2 days with Stacey and her friend Dilly going through every item and deciding if they're going to donate it, if they're going to recycle it, or whether they're going to throw it away. And whilst they're doing this, there's another team of people who are creating functional storage systems in their home. They're cleaning the house, and then the family invited back, usually for a rather emotional viewing of their new home. And this show, I think, is partly popular because it does seem to speak into our cultural context and our cultural moment. In the Western world, many people, but not all, but many people live with excess in their lives. We have a lot of stuff. Now, I couldn't find any UK statistics, but apparently the average American owns 300,000 items. We also try to do a lot of things in our life. We cram it full. Many of us consume a lot of calories. As we know, probably there's been a huge rise in obesity in the UK. And many of us consume a lot of digital information and digital and other kinds of entertainment. We seem to feel compelled to do more, to be more, and to have more, believing that somehow one day we will feel fulfilled. But it's elusive. That day never seems to arrive, and very often the exact opposite is true. I think it's probably fair to say there are many people, maybe some of us as well, but many in our nation who feel overwhelmed, exhausted, with a kind of low-grade anxiety and sense of emptiness. Furthermore, our compulsion for more has supercharged inequality, both in our country and for people across the planet, and it's also been damaging the natural world. There are so many people on our planet who just don't have enough to get by. Now, I'm told it's notoriously difficult to make definitive statements about inequality between rich and poor. However, the International Monetary Fund suggests that the gap between rich and poor people on our planet is only widening, with evidence of rising levels of poverty as well as the rise of billionaire incomes, with the COVID pandemic only exacerbating old inequalities and even creating new ones. Thomas Kelly, who is an American Quaker who wrote extensively on the subject of centering our lives on God's presence, sums it up beautifully. He says, "We feel the pull of many obligations." I think this is on a slide, actually, King. "We feel the pull of many obligations, and we try to fulfill them all. And we are unhappy, uneasy, strained, oppressed, fearful that we shall be shallow." And he goes on to say, "We have heard that there is a way of life vastly richer and deeper than all this hurried existence, a life of unhurried serenity, peace, and power." So what is this better way? And how might we begin to live it and introduce it to those in the world around us? Well, as always, I believe that Jesus has an answer for this, and that there were things that Jesus did in his life that helped him live fully in God's presence all the time. And these actions make up the spiritual practice of simplicity. Now, more on that and what simplicity is in a moment, but first, a quick little history lesson to help us understand what we're up against. So our free market capitalist economy in the UK is built on the pursuit of more. Us not just having what we need, but having more and more and more of what we think we desire. Now, this began in earnest after the Second World War, and a man called Edward Bernays, I'd never heard of him before, but he was an American. He was actually the nephew of Sigmund Freud, the great thinker. And what Bernays did, is he took his uncle's ideas about our powerful, unconscious desires, and he saw an opportunity to manipulate them. In his obituary when he died, he was called the father of modern public relations and is credited with helping kickstart what we now call consumerism. And he wrote this: "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits of the opinions of the masses. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. Our minds are formed, ideas are suggested largely by men we've never heard of, but who control the public mind." Here he's referring to those marketing and advertising people in companies. And I think Edward Bernays' hypothesis was correct, although even at that point he didn't have access to contemporary neuroscience and psychology. But what he was saying seems to be true. Human beings can be duped into desiring things and spending on things that they don't really need. We are hugely motivated by pleasure and also by the avoidance of pain and suffering through the mechanism of fear. And this is what companies play on. Our brains gravitate towards things that provide pleasurable sensory experiences that release a chemical dopamine, and they move away from things that can harm us. And that's for good reason. It's got an important survival function. It's important that we instinctively, without really much thought, avoid the predator, and that we move towards eating those nice, high-fat, high-rich food that gives us extra energy. And also, given that we are such sociable creatures, we are wired for relationship, we are often completely dependent on other human beings. Therefore, we are often also driven by a need to be liked and to be admired by other people, and therefore to avoid being seen as a failure. We are tempted to mask, to hide our flaws and failings, resulting in certain culturally specific behaviours, which in our context often mean presenting ourselves to the world as people that have active, busy social lives, really full CVs, maybe with a kind of tanned athletic body because of time spent in the gym and on good holidays, people that have nice homes, a large wardrobe of clothes and nice cars. Now, furthermore, our brains in our neurobiology have a tendency to become compulsive, even obsessed with what feels nice, what feels good. We can even become addicted to good things, whether that's to a chemical substance such as alcohol, or to what is also known as process addictions, things like shopping or sex or gambling or food. Addictions are not just about someone having poor self-control. It's not a moral failing. Rather, it's about a person's reward system, their neurobiology, their neurochemistry changing. Someone who's addicted, everything becomes about attaining that desired thing, that experience or that substance, as this generates a good rush of dopamine. And people with an addiction are either preoccupied about getting that thing, they are then either intoxicated or then relieved when they've had it, or they're increasingly the time period between relief and preoccupation with having it again gets shorter and shorter. And they also need to have more and more and more of that thing to get the same dopamine hit. Now, I'm sharing all this. You might be like, why are you telling us this? And what's the importance of this? I'm basically sharing all of this in the hope that we might all have a better understanding of why and how each of us can be so susceptible to this culture of more. Now, I don't know about you, but I clearly falsely, given what I'm just about to say, probably pride myself on not being someone that easily falls for the more culture or falls for advertising campaigns. Well, a few months ago, when I had a little bit more time on my hands, when I didn't have such a busy job, I find myself spending probably about 30 minutes watching these rather repetitive, boring videos about some revolutionary new anti-aging skin product which harnessed the power of some ancient seaweed. I mean, for goodness sake. But literally, within half an hour, I was actually contemplating spending money I really did not have, particularly at that point, on this product. Because what the clever marketing people were doing, as Edward Bernays said, they were playing on my fear of my aging skin and my desire to look good, which may be this target for their marketing. Now, the Bible describes the pursuit of more as avarice or greed, which is also often associated with coveting something, envying something, wanting something that somebody else has. And the Bible consistently portrays feeding these things, these sin patterns, as paths to harm and destruction. And I'm just going to read a parable of Jesus. I think the words are going to come up on the screen. It's Luke chapter 12, verses 16 to 21. Sorry, I just need to turn the page. So Jesus told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. So he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store all my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and I will build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. So take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool. This very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? And this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. Jesus is pretty black and white. If we are pursuing just more stuff, and we are not focusing and developing on being rich in God and putting him at the center of our lives, then it's not going to do us any good at all. So back to this spiritual practice of simplicity as a means of taming these insatiable desires, of calming our fears and helping us to live freely and lightly. People have described this practice in various different ways. I rather like this definition because it's quite simple, and that's what this practice is all about. And it's from Joshua Becker, who was a pastor. He's now turned kind of blogger and writer on simplicity, or what he calls minimalism. So he defines it like this. Simplicity is the intentional promotion of the things that we most value and the removal of anything that distracts us from them. So simplicity is the intentional promotion of the things that we most value and the removal of anything that distracts us from them. Now, this practice comes with a little bit of a health warning. This stuff is hard. If we accept the invitation to engage with pursuing a life more closely centered on God, then we are going to feel challenged. Firstly, because it's so countercultural, and because even some elements of our body will resist it, as I've just explained. And secondly, because true simplicity isn't just about sorting your life out Tracy Solomon style, or tinkering around the edges, maybe adjusting how we spend or having some better storage solutions in our house. These can all be really good things. However, simplicity goes far further and far deeper than all this. True simplicity is about the decluttering of our souls. It's about examining what we do, who we are, who we're trusting. It's about learning sometimes to tolerate some uncomfortable emotions that rise up within us, and learning what it means to tame those kind of compulsions. Bethany Allen from Bridgetown Church in Portland in the US says that the practice of simplicity reveals what we think about God, about ourselves, and about other people. Do we really trust God to meet our needs? Do we really believe that there's only one person, God himself, whose opinion of us really matters? Do we have both a realistic view of our failings and our need for God's mercy, as well as a deep awareness of how deeply precious we are, as Charlotte was just sharing with us? Do we believe that preferring others will actually produce the richest kind of joy and peace? And these kind of questions will likely surface in our minds as we go on this journey through this series together. But despite these very real challenges, I'd encourage you to stay engaged. Because failure to wrestle with these kind of questions and to overcome, however imperfectly, a life of excess will potentially compromise our mental and physical health, but even more importantly, it could even sabotage our relationship with Jesus if we are wanting to pursue a relationship with him. And reframing this maybe in a rather more positive way, learning to live more simply opens us up to great joy as we get to participate in God's economy. The way that God moves material things and provision around his people according to his agenda. Living with open hands, expecting that he may prompt us to release what we own, to be a blessing to others, and also to receive blessing from others when we might need it. Not only frees us from the self-absorbed tyranny of obsessing about what we do or we don't have, or how we look, or what other people think about us, but it's also just so much more exciting. Being available and ready for God to nudge us towards giving or thinking about somebody is surely part of life in all its fullness, which Jesus speaks about. So, our key verse for today, if there's one thing you take away from today, maybe it's these words, and it's aptly very simple. And it also comes from Luke 12, towards the end of the chapter, where that story, that parable of Jesus, also comes from. And it's verse 31, and this is the New Living Translation, and I think it's going to come up somewhere on the slide. Sorry, King, I can't tell you which number it is, but a few along. And Jesus says this: "Seek first the kingdom of God above all else, and he will give you everything you need." Chapter 12 in Luke, verse 31. "Seek first the kingdom of God above all else, and he will give you everything you need." And I love Jesus' pastoral heart in the next verse, 32, which you won't find on the screen. He says this: "So don't be afraid, little flock, for it gives your Father great happiness to give you the kingdom." Isn't that incredible? God is so delighted to give us all of heaven's riches. Now, last Sunday, we had Vision Sunday. You might want to catch up with that online if you missed it and you're part of our family here. And we talked about this idea of consecration, which is this kind of biblical word for putting God back at the center of our lives, living set-apart lives for him. And simplicity is really part of that. Simplicity is at the heart of living those kind of consecrated lives we spoke on last Sunday. So, as we close for this morning, just a few thoughts on how, if we want to, we might begin to simplify our lives and to create space for God's voice to be heard more clearly. A simple life isn't a life where we deny pleasure. That's called aestheticism. And sometimes God has called people to live with very little. So if you read the Old Testament and the New Testament, think of people like John the Baptist. They didn't have much materially. But it's also important to say that God has never been anti or against the goodness of the things on earth, all things that he has made and he said were good at the beginning of time. God makes wonderful, beautiful, and delicious things for us to enjoy. But he doesn't want us to find our contentment solely in those things. He wants us to know the freedom that comes from learning, as Paul said in Philippians chapter 4, these very challenging words, that he had learnt to be content both when he had very little and also when he had a lot. Remember verse 32 of chapter 12 that we just read? It makes God happy to give us the riches of his kingdom. He wants us to be deeply joyful and content. He also wants us to learn the joy of excelling in generosity, to hold what we own lightly and to give it freely and joyfully when he prompts us to do so. Now, Darren's going to be speaking a bit more on this in a few weeks, so I don't want to steal his thunder, but I would suggest that is why adhering rigidly to what the Old Testament calls a tithe, which is the idea of giving God the first 10% of everything that comes in, regardless of your income, despite it being pretty radical as a concept in our self-absorbed more society, and also a really helpful benchmark, it can risk missing the point. God is far more interested in whether or not we live abundantly generous lives, where giving flows naturally from our hearts in recognition of all that he has given us as his children. And finally, I just want to acknowledge the presence of individual differences in the room. So some of us, by nature of our personality, or maybe our experiences in life, especially when we were children, or maybe how our particular brain is wired, or our life stage and health, will find resisting the urge for more and living with excess harder than others. Some of us prefer, or have been maybe forced by experience, to live quieter, a slower pace of life. Others as us probably feel that our lives are very full. We may even thrive on the buzz of doing a lot. But I believe this practice is relevant for every one of us, because all of us will struggle to daily keep God front and center in our lives. So, just to let you know where we're kind of going on this journey through this practice of simplicity, next week Martin is going to be speaking on simplicity of speech, which is an easily often neglected element of simple living. Then we're going to have a little bit of a break from our series because it's Sunday breakfast, first Sunday of the month, and then it's our weekend together after that. And then kind of mid-June, Darren's going to be speaking to us a bit more about how we simplify what we own and make resources available for God's purposes. And then Alicia is going to be coming to speak to us on how we simplify our time and our schedules before we end the series with an interview with a friend of mine called Emily. Now, Emily works for the development organisation, International Development Organisation at Oxfam, which is just down the road, handily, and we'll be discussing the impact of living with excess on the world's poor and how we might live lives of greater generosity. All of this is a practice, so I want to leave you with some ideas that you might put into practice even over the next few days. Now remember, it's purely invitational. I'm not going to be checking up on how you got on next week. I mean, in life groups, you might want to talk with each other about this, but there's absolutely no obligation. It's entirely your choice. Although hopefully I've made the case for why it could be a good thing to engage with. Remember, the clue is in the word practice. Richard Foster says that developing spiritual practice in our lives is all about training rather than trying. Our minds and our bodies take time to adjust to new ways of doing things. But over time, by doing things a bit more differently with intention, we can find that those things that we once found really challenging come a bit more easily. So here are a few ideas. There's kind of two options that you might want to think a bit about this week, and I think they're going to come up on the screen. They're like the second from the last slide, I think. So maybe you want to jot these down. Maybe you want to take a picture on your phone. So firstly, if you want to, you might want to set aside some time to think, to meditate on what is one thing that you are really attached to. Now, don't think about people. It's important that we are attached to some really key people in our lives. But what is something that you might be really attached to that you wonder if it's actually cluttering up your life and maybe even cluttering up your soul in some way? What is something that you're desiring that might come before your desire for God? So, for example, it might be something like your desire for your boss to think that you're doing a really good job at work. And so maybe what that means is you're tempted to put in extra hours on a very regular basis. Or maybe it's that you're tempted to just drop into conversation, just how well you're doing in something, or to kind of really not say when you're struggling with something. So it might be that kind of thing. And then you might want to commit to just noticing that this week, noticing when that desire rises to the surface. What are the emotions that come with that? What does that desire make you want to do or not do? And then if you want to go further than that, you might want to think about a simple practice just to kind of manage that desire. Maybe that in that example I gave, maybe it would be setting a limit on the extra hours that you work, or resisting that urge to say something in conversation with your boss that paints you in a particularly good light. So that's kind of number one you might want to think about this week. Or you might want to do this. You might want to find something that you own. Maybe it's something in your house, or I don't know, it's something else. It could be very small or it could be larger, that you attach value to. Something that means something to you, and give it away. Choose somebody to give it away to, or I don't know, give it to charity. And do that prayerfully and ask that God would fill you with his love and with his joy. And just finally, a couple of kind of resources. This is on the final slide. Just if you want to think about this practice a little bit more, here's a couple of things. Some of them are books, some of them are kind of digital resources. I mentioned Thomas Kelly earlier. He's written loads of beautiful material on what it means to center our lives more generally around God and pursuing God's presence. And his book, Testament of Devotion in particular, is really a significant book for this. Richard Foster has written some classics. His book, it's rather old now. If anyone wants to borrow this copy, they're welcome. Freedom of Simplicity is excellent. There's also a chapter in his famous book, Celebration of Discipline, on simplicity as well. Digital-wise, if you head to the Bridgetown Church website, they did a fantastic series all on the spiritual discipline of simplicity. And also Joshua Becker, who I mentioned, he has a website and various resources, including some videos on YouTube and things. One in particular called Little Habits to Change Your Life in 1 month, which just gives you some really practical things to kind of get started with. So we are just going to pray and just be quiet for a few moments before we close our time together and we collect our children or they're brought down to us. And I'm aware, as always, that I've said many words and we can't possibly remember them all. But maybe there is just one thing, like one little nugget, even if it's one word or one phrase or that Bible passage from Luke chapter 12 or something else that God just wants us to hold on to. Father, would you come and minister to us, your people, wherever we are, in our standing with you, whether we know you very well, whether we feel alive in our relationship with you, whether we really don't know you at all, or we're curious, or this is all very new to us. Thank you for your presence with us this morning. And we don't just want to be people who come along on a Sunday and have a good time and see each other and have a drink and have a chat, and then we kind of get on with the rest of our lives. We want to be people where our lives are infused by your presence, where we're learning what it is to center our lives on your presence. And where we're finding practical ways to do that, things that kind of build a rhythm or a structure to our lives so that we are reminded to put you first. And so, Lord, I pray from all the many things I've said in our time of sung worship earlier and Charlotte's word, that for every one of us there would be something precious that's like a golden thread that stays with us and we think on and we're reminded of over the next 7 days or whenever it is that we meet again. Going to read those words from Luke 12, chapter 31 and 32 again. Jesus says, "Seek the kingdom of God above all else, and he will give you everything you need." Father, if we're anxious, if we're unsure whether you're going to meet our needs, if we feel that we're living with lack, that we don't have enough, whether that's of material things or whether that's of friendship, or whether that's of satisfying work, or whatever it is that we might feel we are lacking or that's absent. Lord, would you come in and would you fill that space with your presence? And if it's that we just need to be reminded that God is deeply pleased with us, as Charlotte was sharing with us earlier, and he's so pleased that he is so happy to give us the kingdom, that all of that is available to us. Lord, would you shower that on us this morning? Amen. Amen. Amen.